books for many, many years.
Do you support reversing some of these provisions?
Do I prevent which provisions?
Say the no-fault policy?
I can talk about that on individual cases if you have an example that you want to talk about.
Well, I'd say, would you support being able to move some of these policies over to a more holistic review? You know, you yourself asked for case-by-case consideration. Should that case-by-case consideration be codified in federal law instead of having blanket one-strike or no-fault policies?
I'm always in favor of more flexibility.
Well, I'm
I couldn't do that at an EV. I wouldn't be able to make the round trip in time. But okay, assume we were able to ever produce batteries that last long enough, the charging stations, all the stuff. Why would we get rid of the American production of it?
Thank you. There are several different components to your question. I want to make sure that I address them. First and foremost, on the issue of child exploitation, child labor, I think it is the role of the United States for us to push back forcefully on this production, and not just in the production of energy, but across the board. We see this in textile production, energy production, cobalt mining.
Explosive congressional hearing, Ben Carson and Chip Roy confronted Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and exposed the emptiness of her rhetoric. As a patriot, I break down how Carson's calm wisdom and Roy's blunt honesty dismantled AOC's theatrics and revealed the power of accountability, evidence, and truth. This is not just a debate. It's a lesson in the fight for America's future.
For joining us today. Secretary Carson, in December 2017, you delivered a keynote at the Manhattan Institute where you stated, quote, "The war on poverty sometimes conflicted with the war on drugs, which often dealt harshly with nonviolent offenders, taking men away from their families and disproportionately affecting minority communities." Are these your words?
Yes.
Do you acknowledge that the war on drugs disproportionately impacted Black communities and communities of color, despite marijuana and other drug use levels being comparable to white communities?
Traditionally, that has been the case.
And I see here, are you also aware that when a formerly incarcerated person is homeless, there's a 60% chance that they will be rearrested? But if that same person has access to housing, the percentage drops to 29%.
Housing is one of the factors that is beneficial in preventing recidivism.
I'm concerned here that the war on drugs has not been solely limited to incarceration, and that the negative impact of the war on drugs has not been limited to incarceration. But also we had legislated rippling effects that also seems to have been codified in our housing system. Are you aware of HUD's one-strike rule, which evicts tenants for a single incidence of criminal activity, no matter how minor, with no holistic review?
There is the ability of local jurisdictions to alter that rule.
But federally, this provision still persists, correct?
As far as I know, it's still intact.
And so a person could be stop and frisked and be found in possession of a small amount of marijuana and then be evicted or have their entire family evicted from public housing.
That is a possibility.
Are you aware that owners and public housing authorities can subject tenants to tests for alcohol and drugs?
They can require that, yes.
And I see here that we also have no-fault policies where an entire family can be evicted for the criminal activity of a guest of the household, even without the knowledge of anyone in that household. Are you aware of that provision as well?
The use of such activity is extremely limited, if ever used.
But they are still codified in federal law, correct?
Is it on the federal books? As far as I know, it's been on the books for many, many years.
Do you support reversing some of these provisions?
Do I prevent which provisions?
Say the no-fault policy?
I can talk about that on individual cases if you have an example that you want to talk about.
Well, I'd say, would you support being able to move some of these policies over to a more holistic review? You know, you yourself asked for case-by-case consideration. Should that case-by-case consideration be codified in federal law instead of having blanket one-strike or no-fault policies?
I'm always in favor of more flexibility.
Well, I'm happy to hear that, Secretary Carson. I'd also like to highlight there's been much talk about the issue with NYCHA and public housing, and it's horrifying, the conditions that are happening in NYCHA. It's horrifying that people are living through winter without heat, opening their ovens to try to make sure that they're able to sleep through the night. But I think it's important to notice that this is not about throwing more money to the problem. This is about throwing the money at the problem. NYCHA and public housing across the country has been starved by members of Congress for over 15 years, and that deficit has built up for many, many years, which has led to, in New York City alone, a $32 billion price tag to make sure that we get people basic heat, hot water, and so on. And I don't think that, no matter what policy changes we make, you can't take food away from a child and then not understand why they can't or don't eat. And I think that that's exactly what's happening with our public housing program. Chairwoman, I would like to seek unanimous consent to submit to the record a New York Times article on what it would take to fix New York's public housing.
Without objection, such is the order.
Thank you very much. And I'd also like to make of note that
I want the internal combustion engine. I actually think it's more affordable and better for the American worker who wants the plumber in San Marcos, Texas, to be able to go to work and afford the car. But if you buy into the motion of having, EVs that you can drive all over creation, even if you're from Texas and you had to do like I did, I appreciate the chairman pointing out the passing of my grandma. I had to drive 6 hours, like 300 miles to go see my grandma Thursday before she passed away, and 6 hours back. I couldn't do that at an EV. I wouldn't have been able to make the round trip in time. But okay, assume we were able to ever produce the batteries that last long enough, the charging stations, all the stuff. Why would we get rid of the American production of it?
Thank you. There are several different components to your question. I want to make sure that I address them. First and foremost, on the issue of child exploitation, child labor, I think it is the role of the United States for us to push back forcefully on this production, and not just in the production of energy, but across the board. We see this in textile production, energy production, cobalt mining. It is horrific, and we need to make sure that our sources do not include child labor. But to get to the core of the question, too, on the China front, is that I find it interesting that there is this concern about Chinese ownership of minerals, and it is legitimate. However, the response to that seems to be deregulation specifically for companies that are largely Chinese-owned here in the United States. These companies are subsidiaries where the benefit of what we are deregulating here, and I'll give you a specific example. I would be remiss not to mention that the minerals produced specifically at the proposed Twin Metals mine that is implicated in this legislation would most likely be shipped to China for refining and smelting to be sold on the global market. These are not American-owned companies that American mined minerals would be going to. And so if your concern is the Chinese predominance of ownership in the mining market, I would be very concerned about passing this legislation. So that, I think, on the China piece there. And lastly, on the meeting our targets and mining cobalt. I think it's a false choice to say that in order for us to mine cobalt, we either have to destroy some of the most sacred lands in the United States or rely on child labor. There's responsible mining in the United States that is available to us. But secondly, I also find it interesting that the majority presently pushes back against battery recycling, which would allow us to open the path to reducing our reliance on mining in general. There is enormous potential in recycling many of these EV batteries, but we have not made the investments or the shifts necessary in order to unlock that so that we can reduce our reliance on solely mining as the only source of battery. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. Before I give my colleague a chance to respond, as I think he probably wishes to, I would only note that happy to have a conversation about restricting Chinese ownership of any number of corporate activities in the United States, or ownership of farmland, or ownership of land near military bases or frankly, ownership of meat packing, production, including mineral production and so forth. A significant reason why it would be mined here and shipped back is because they've got all the production facilities, because they've been building and mining these, because they've got the resources to do that. And here we've got the God-given benefit in America being able to produce very clean burning natural gas, very efficient ability to have automobiles that have an internal combustion engine, which are...
Ocasio-Cortez is more than political theater. It is a perfect snapshot of the battle for America's future. On one side, you had two men who believe in accountability, evidence, and real leadership. On the other side, you had the poster child of the radical left, AOC, whose entire career is built on soundbites, outrage, and Instagram clips instead of substance. Let me walk you through this showdown because every moment tells us something about where this country is heading. It starts with Dr. Ben Carson. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't play the media game. He's calm, collected, and full of authority that comes from decades of actual service, both in medicine and in government. When he looks at AOC and says, "Evidence matters," the room shifts. Because that's exactly what the radical left cannot provide. They can cry about injustice, they can rant about systemic problems, they can tweet to millions of followers, but when someone asks for facts, for proof that policies are deliberately designed to harm, the entire argument collapses.
Carson exposed that.
Then you have Chip Roy. He comes in swinging, the way he always does. He doesn't sugarcoat anything, and he doesn't play nice when America's future is on the line. He told AOC directly that she thrives on selective outrage, that she cherry-picks narratives to make herself look like a hero while vilifying anyone who disagrees. That's the truth. These hearings are supposed to be about oversight and transparency, not about giving one congresswoman a platform to perform for the cameras. Roy cut straight through the theatrics and called it out for what it is, a circus. And here's the part that really matters. Carson and Roy didn't just dismantle AOC's arguments, they offered a solution. Carson suggested an outcomes audit. Think about that for a second. In Washington, where most people are happy to argue endlessly and never deliver, Carson flipped the script. He said, "Let's measure results. Let's see the data. Let's stop rewarding soundbites and start rewarding success." That's leadership. That's accountability. That's what patriots have been begging for, a government that actually works for the people instead of just talking at them. AOC, of course, tried to pivot. She threw around words like gaslighting and victimhood. She played her usual game of painting herself as the champion of the oppressed. But the more she spoke, the more hollow it sounded. Because once Carson and Roy set the stage with facts, she couldn't escape. All she could do was double down on rhetoric. This fictional hearing captures the exact struggle we see in real life every single day. The left thrives on chaos. They don't want evidence. They want emotion. They don't want accountability. They want control. They survive by dividing Americans into victims and villains, by telling people that this country is broken beyond repair, and by blaming conservatives for every problem that exists. But when men like Carson and Roy speak up, the left's narrative collapses. Carson represents calm strength, rooted in faith and personal responsibility. His life story alone is a direct rebuke to the idea that America is nothing but oppression. He rose from poverty to become one of the greatest surgeons in the world. He lived the American dream. And that's why his voice is so dangerous to the left, because it proves their message of despair is a lie. Roy, on the other hand, represents the blunt honesty that Americans crave. He doesn't play along with Washington niceties. He says what many Americans are thinking but are too afraid to say, that the left is manipulating